Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy. On today's show, we have Mike Stern. He's a scoring engineer with credits on Sex and the City 1 and 2, Iron Man 2, Borat subsequent Moviefilm, and Hustle, of course, among many more. Check it out. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I've been following your progress on Facebook, and
Awesome.
You've had some amazing people, and it's actually a real honor
Awesome.
for me to be asked. And so
Cool.
great to see you again. We go back a long time.
It's been a ways. It's definitely been a while.
Yes.
Awesome. I like to start by, if you want to go over your backstory, kind of how you got to where you are, what made you decide to be an engineer, that kind of thing.
Sure. Thank you. This year, I am celebrating my 40th anniversary as a recording engineer.
Damn.
I've been working in studios since 1983.
Nice.
I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston and majored in both guitar and was in the very, very first music production and engineering degree graduating class.
Dang,
which was
very first one.
It was a pretty special class.
Nice.
A lot of us are still doing it.
Nice.
And
That's
a lot
cool.
of us are in LA. Berklee was unique then in that instead of being kind of a musical conservatory approach, I think of it more as a music vocational school where it really taught me how to earn a living in music.
Right, that's cool. Nice.
And while I was there, in retrospect, I think this was a really smart move. I started interning at Downtown Recorders.
Okay.
Mitch Benoff, his studio, he's now a teacher at Berklee, but 2 years of very unglamorous work hauling trash through rat-infested warehouses, and
that's what it is.
Learned that I would have to really, nothing would be handed to me. I had to work hard, and as you know, the apprenticeship in our business can be grueling, and but I did get to work with some really, really great people, and stayed in Boston for a few years. Worked at Downtown Recorders, at Normandy Sound with Phil Green and Tom Soares, which was a great record studio. We put an SSL in there when I was there. But I knew that the level of work that I wanted to do was not going to be available to me in Boston, so I moved to LA in 1990.
Okay.
My very first job, I got a job as a staff engineer at Chick Corea's Mad Hatter studio.
Nice.
And that was a wonderful opportunity. We had a beautiful Neve 8078 there, and
where was that place?
it still is there. It
Oh,
still
really?
exists. It's in Silver Lake.
Okay. Is it privately owned now? Or?
The Church of Chick sold it to the Church of Scientology.
Okay.
And it's, I believe, still somewhat open to the public.
Okay.
Last time I inquired about working there, it didn't work out. But I believe they still have that famous Hamburg Steinway, which by now is probably 80 years old, 9-foot Steinway.
Right.
When I worked there, Chick's wife, Gail Moran, also had a 9-foot Bosendorfer there. So we had those two spectacular pianos.
Nice.
And I got a great education in learning how to record piano properly. Most engineers, I hate to say, over mic a piano. They put too many mics. Right. They don't know where to put the mics.
Right.
And so that was a great place to work. And I was there till 1995, 1996. And one of the highlights is I got to work with Butch Vig on a Soul Asylum record called Let Your Dim Light Shine, which went platinum.
Nice.
Beautiful record.
Awesome.
And Butch, I learned a lot from him.
Nice.
During that record, I got a call from John Debney to help him at his studio, and I ended up working for him for 10 years in film music, and I got to go to all the scoring stages. At that time in LA, there were 6 scoring stages. Now there's 3.
Right.
But I got to work at...
Wait, what were the other 2? Because I know of Tadeo, obviously.
Tadeo.
What was the other ones? Oh, Paramount.
Paramount Stage M.
Right.
By the way, I did what I think is the very, very last mix at
really?
Paramount Stage
Nice.
M. I mixed a movie called Mr. McGorium's Wonder Emporium for Aaron Zigman, whom I did, I think, 65 movies with.
Awesome.
And that board is now at Silent Zoo.
Yes,
as
that's
you know,
right. Yep, exactly.
Which is a wonderful space, a really wonderful space. Victor Janiqua runs it, and Holden
Woodward, I believe.
Woodward owns it. Yeah, nice people. We just
so what was the last scoring stage? I don't know of that one.
It was Universal. And,
Universal have their own stage? I didn't even know that.
It was Universal, and I got to do a couple things there watching Bobby Fernandez work with John Debney. And
nice.
I was very fortunate. I got to, working for John Debney, I got to see the greats work. I got to spend a lot of time with Sean Murphy.
Nice.
John Richards, who I cannot say enough good things about. He was truly my mentor for orchestral recording.
Right.
I've now worked on about 260 film scores. And
nice.
The very, very first orchestra that I recorded for a great composer named Tim Jones, we went to Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And I believe it was about a 76-piece orchestra, if I remember correctly. In the room, it was a church.
Right.
It wasn't really big enough, so part of the orchestra was on the floor, and part of the orchestra was on a stage.
Okay.
I think I put the brass on the stage.
Right.
And
nice.
John Richards met with me for lunch and at Chez Nous in Toluca Lake, now gone. We used to meet there often.
Awesome.
And first of all, having your first orchestral session of that size is daunting to begin with.
Yes.
We couldn't fit more than, I think, 40 people at Mad Hatter, so I did some small orchestra dates there. But having an unusual, non-traditional floor plan, and I'll never forget one thing John said to me afterwards, because it's a difficult room to work.
Yeah.
LA East, it was called. They may still exist. I don't know. I haven't been there in forever. But he said, when you work in LA, when you work anywhere other than LA, you appreciate what we have here.
Right.
And that's really true, because there's an efficiency and an understanding of not only orchestral music, but just the whole timeline. If there's a 10 a.m. downbeat here, you're recording at 10:01.
Yes.
And I've gone and worked other places that I won't necessarily mention by name, big sessions, 70, 80-piece orchestras where you show up for the setup and nothing is set up yet. And you're just looking at the clock saying, we're in trouble.
Right.
And sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't.
Right.
So we're very lucky with what we have in LA. But to continue, Dennis Sands, I got to work a lot with Dennis, who's also a dear friend, whom I respect deeply. And Bobby Fernandez, I mentioned, and there's at least one other scoring mixer that I'm probably leaving out. But it was a special time in the 90s because we were still recording on tape.
Yeah.
We kind of pioneered the whole concept of pre-records when we started using first ADATs and then DA88s and Pro Tools started coming in. I saw the transition. And worked on Pro Tools really since day one when it was Sound Tools. Yeah. And I remember the thrill of getting a thing in the mail showing it was like a Mac. Now you would call it a Mac Classic or Mac Plus, saying non-destructive digital audio, and the wow factor back in the day of cutting tape was incredible. But realizing the power of non-destructive audio editing, I was in from the start.
Absolutely. That's crazy. So one thing I like to talk about a lot on the podcast is kind of how to inspire artists in the studio. And obviously you've done a number of actual album recordings, but you do mostly scoring. And in the scoring world, it's a different animal, so to speak. Like you're more like, it's like the artist is really the composer.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you like prep a project with a composer to make sure that their vision is being, established?
That's a great question. The job of the engineer, if you remember the TV show MASH and the character Radar O'Reilly, is to anticipate every need, and it's done before the composer even crosses his radar.
Right.
We're there to make sure he doesn't have to worry about anything technical. It's all said and done. Sometimes a composer will just, make a grunt, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I already did that," and and composers are very insular creatures. They stay in their own spaces, in their own studios, and they write. They spend a lot of time alone.
Right.
And there are times when, as the engineer, you're the only person there with them, even during their writing process.
Right.
So the job is to support them in any and every way that you can, free them up so they can do what they're best at.
Right.
Most composers are very non-technical.
Yeah.
There are great exceptions. I mentioned Tim Jones. He's one of the most technically adept. He's a great engineer as well.
Right.
But just make sure that you're also not in their way. It's not about you. But you also need to be the calm in the middle of the hurricane.
Right, exactly. Scoring sessions can be intense.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I recorded and mixed Sex and the City 1 and 2 with Aaron Zigman, and in particular, Sex and the City 2 was extremely challenging, and there was a ton of music, and it was all, 200, 300 tracks, which back then we were pushing the limits. Now the computers can do much more.
Common,
But we were always pushing the limits, and at the end of that particular show, the music editor, whom I dearly love, Angie Rubin, basically said, "Thank you so much. You were the calm in the storm and kept me going." Because it was difficult. And sitting where I am now, I've seen almost every situation possible, and I have maybe a different way of looking at technical problems than because so much of our job as engineers and so much of life is solving technical problems. I just say, well, if it's a technical problem, there's a solution to it. And how can I calmly go about trying to implement that? If I don't know the answer, usually I'll know where to find it or who to call. Engineers tend to be very supportive of each other, even though we're rarely in the same room.
It's true. It's true.
But I have the deepest of respect for my colleagues in this town because they're all incredibly accomplished and they all do great work. And we're lucky to be doing what we're doing. Like we're not digging ditches in 108 degrees in the valley to earn our living. For sure. So I'm grateful. And
so what about when you're like some composers are in the room, in the control room with you. Some composers are actually conducting.
Right.
How does that vary when you're working with those two different? I mean, obviously, when they're on the podium, it's a much deeper level of trust because often there's not even time for them to come and listen. But how do you approach each one differently?
I'm gonna answer that question in a little bit segmented.
Sure.
It's more efficient when a composer is the conductor.
Okay.
Because they wrote the music and they don't have to translate. I remember John Debney's a fantastic composer. And I remember one time when he used someone else, how frustrated he was to be in the booth because it slowed him down. And John's one of the fastest guys in the business. He's so efficient. So that's segment one. Segment two is when you develop a relationship with a composer, it's more often than not a long-term relationship. You know, I've worked with Debney for years. I worked with Aaron Zigman for years, and a lot of my other composers, and they trust you and they respect your ears. One of the things that I bring to the plate is that I'm also a musician and I can
Right.
read a score,
Right.
which is essential as I think as a scoring mixer and as an engineer that you understand. And I regularly play music and record, so I know what it's like to be on both sides of the glass.
Of course.
And it's a good reminder.
Yeah.
I also think a great booth person is part of it, especially when you're working on something that has
Right.
a real budget. I mentioned I think I did at least 65 movies with Aaron Zigman. Our co-producer arranger was Jerry Hay.
Okay.
Best years in the business. I probably
Right.
learned more from Jerry
Right.
than anyone I ever worked with. You could be listening to a playback. He has perfect pitch.
Yeah.
Listening to a playback of an 80-piece orchestra, and he'll tell you the second bassoon should be playing an E flat, but it's playing an E.
Right.
So, and that's a part of the teamwork as well.
Of course.
I never dreamed when I was a student that I'd get to work with someone like Jerry.
Right.
And I knew that I belonged in the room at some point when Jerry asked me my opinion on something and I was able to back it up.
Yeah. Awesome.
And to me, that was a highlight of
Nice.
my, knowing that all this
yeah.
hard work had paid off.
Nice. Awesome. You mentioned you play music as well, so you've been on both sides of the glass. How does it vary do you like engineer yourself when you're recording your own projects, or how does that work?
I often do.
Yeah. How do you balance the technical and the creative in that sense? Like, because it's easy to get lost in the technicalities when you're trying to be creative.
This is such a great question because this is an area I can really speak to. When you're doing your own stuff, you have to set up your room in a way where the technology is at your fingertips and it doesn't get in the way. If you get inspired, and I mean, I wrote a bunch of songs during the pandemic. It was a painful time for everybody.
Yeah.
If you get inspired, you can't have all your stuff put away.
Right.
You have to have a space where you literally, having a master power switch, for example, where everything goes on at once, and literally, I've got my room set up where I can, in 5 minutes, I can be recording.
Nice.
And I have a system.
Right.
You have to have the tools, the technology be on your side where you're not fumbling for the chords.
Right.
You're not saying, where is this adapter?
Right.
You have to be ready to go. And it is a different mindset when you're the artist, when you're recording, when you're engineering.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're engineering your support and you're translating and you're producing and you can be also part psychologist.
Right, absolutely.
Working with a band.
Often a big part.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah.
I mean, getting along with people and it's, do you want to be in a room with this person for 12 hours a day?
Exactly.
I've gotten jobs because I was easy to get along with,
Right.
or at least I thought I was. I don't know. We don't know how. I won't go down that rabbit hole.
Oh, good.
What I've also learned when I'm recording myself is to focus on that moment and not be an editor,
Right.
which is crucial because you have to just let it come out. If you are editing yourself while you are performing, it's going to be a problem because you're going to be getting in the way of your own creative process.
Right. Constantly switching, because it's a different side of your brain. Really,
It is a different side of your
technical,
brain. And as an engineer or producer, you're always editing in your brain. You're the old joke is, that take was perfect, do it again.
Exactly.
So that you have coverage, which I always recommend, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So then how does it vary when you're on a scoring stage, it's all session players.
Right.
So they're not per se the artist, but they still need to be inspired and comfortable and all those things like they are the artist. So how do you walk that line?
Well, the LA session musicians are the best in the world. They're absolute pros.
Right.
I've also been blessed to work at Abbey Road 5 times, which is, with the London Symphony and the London Philharmonic. So
Awesome.
I've gotten the experience of spending time with the best
Right.
musicians in the world. They have a way that they work. It's always remarkable to hear a composer's demo and then see the musicians play it and hear it come out. I never lose that thrill of that moment.
Right.
They're there to do the best job that they can. They need to be communicated with in a way where they can do their best job, where they can. Hopefully, you've got a conductor that can give them feedback in a way that they can receive, because they can adjust. They are incredibly responsive to direction, whether it be dynamics. Intonation is always, of course, the biggest issue. Intonation and rhythm, and not grind the musicians. Treat them with respect, because they want to do a great job. And they love what they do.
It's actually interesting, because a lot of times, granted, in the scoring world and studio world, a lot of us know this, but typically the talkback from the booth is only going to the conductor, not any of the players.
Correct.
So that the people in the booth can, get on the talkback. That was terrible. They're all out of tune. And then the conductor is like, oh, please, they like interpret the message and make sure the musicians are, comfortable in that.
There's a language. I don't think I've ever said to a conductor that was terrible.
Well, yeah, that's an extreme example.
But there are times when, oh God, I did this one movie where it was before Silent Zoo. It was called The Bridge, and a beautiful composer came from Japan and wanted to work with me, and it was a FICOR non-union session, and I walked into the room and I didn't recognize a single face.
Jeez.
Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in the morning we had brass and winds, not strings and winds, and it was beautiful. Took our lunch break, walked back in the room, and it was brass, and I didn't recognize a single face, and I thought to myself, we're in trouble.
Jeez.
I working with Jerry Hay, I've had a beautiful relationship with the brass players, with the A-plus brass players in this town.
Absolutely.
Gary Grant and Bill Reichenbach and the Cats.
Of course.
And I didn't recognize a single face, and sure enough, the two out of the, I think there were three trumpet players, not four, got fired on the first cue.
Jeez.
And I'll never forget one of the French horn players saying, "This part is not exactly idiomatic to the instrument. Can we take it down an octave?" And the composer blinked and said, "Play the ink."
Jeez.
And he was right. I mean, it was an A-level score, and it would have taken quite a few takes with the A-listers. And these guys were like C-. Oh,
jeez.
I feel like I might be getting a little off topic here, but
no, that's fine.
It is, you need great players. There's a language between the engineers and music editors. We often serve as translators, engineers in particular,
of course,
as does the composer. If he's working with a director that doesn't speak music, he's the translator. And we're all in a service industry. We're trying to achieve the emotional content and the dramatic content for the film as visioned between the composer and the director and the producers.
Right, exactly. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide, The Art Method, the Advanced Recording Toolkit. In it, I share the details of how you can get pro studio results from your home studio. I've believed for a long time that it's the cooking, not the kitchen. If you can learn some of the advanced methods for getting great results in the studio, you can do it in any studio. I skip the basics and dive into the more nuanced info you need to level up the quality of your home studio recordings. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/art. And now, back to the show. So how has advancements in recording technology influenced the way you work with artists in the studio?
Well, I mentioned when I started it was on tape. And not just 24-track, but 16-track 2-inch.
Oh, geez. Nice.
And I mean, the technology now is phenomenal. Well, like anything you want to do, you pretty much can. If you know anything about car racing, the first IROC races, they leveled the playing field. It was all Porsche 911s that were exactly the same car and the same engine. so that it was no longer the best car one, it was the best driver run one. We're kind of in that equivalent for Pro Tools, where the tools are kind of all the same now, you know.
Right.
I mean, obviously, every engineer has a different set of plugins.
Right.
I should mention I'm Eventide artist and Isotope artist, so they've given me all this stuff, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah.
We all have the same tools at our disposal now, so it's really the engineer that's going to make a difference.
Right.
Our track limits are now pretty much endless.
Pretty much.
Don't tell that to the composers. They should not know this.
Exactly.
But you know, you give 5 engineers the same piece of material to mix, and you're going to get 5 different mixes.
Absolutely.
I've been lucky to do 3 Star Wars trailers.
Okay.
Last Jedi, Force Awakens, and it'll come. But there's one in particular that I did for The Last Jedi with Chris Westlake, and it's beautiful in that it's the London the London Phil, I think, it is LSO. But the music's really featured, and they gave it to another engineer, friend of mine, who's a close friend, extremely talented, but he's known for trailers.
Right.
And we both mixed the same thing, and I'm known for more of a lush orchestral sound with depth.
Right.
And they chose mine.
Okay.
I did get the opportunity to listen to his, and it was really traditional trailer, you know, very compressed, bright and edgy, and mine is very expansive and lush and open. It sounds like a film score.
Yeah.
It premiered at the Olympics, was seen by 25 million people the first time it aired.
Right.
I knew it was my mix because they came back a couple of days and asked me to do a surround version.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And when I got a text from him when it premiered, he said, hey, that sounds really great. I think it's your mix. And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Jeez, that's awesome.
And that's the end of my bragging.
No, that's cool. Nice. Can you share a memorable moment when your engineering skills significantly enhanced or transformed a performance?
Wow. You know, nothing is floating to the top, but I would say it happens every recording session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're there to elevate and bring our experience to the table every time we work with an artist.
Right.
A lot of that, you know, when we try to save a session, if something's going wrong, like if there's power failures or computer problems, sometimes if there's computer problems at the start or session or a set of problems, or you have a bad assistant or assistant's not there, that's the worst thing. If you are an assistant, do not leave the room.
Exactly.
You have no business leaving the room for extended periods.
Working. Yeah, exactly.
It's bad. It's bad news. And I'm going to parlay this into, you know, these days everyone thinks they're an engineer. I've got 40 years of being in the room with everybody from Tom Jones to Bon Jovi. I mixed something for Jerry Goldsmith.
Nice.
And when I met him shortly before he passed, he and his engineer Bruce Botnick approved my mixes without any. I remixed The Challenge for a record label, and they approved my mixes without any notes because I did my homework.
Nice.
And it sounded amazing.
Awesome.
And when I met him, he's like, "Wow, great job!" And he was known to be, you know, often could be difficult.
Nice.
So as I was saying, in terms of everyone thinks there's an engineer, they're an engineer these days.
Right.
There's no substitute for hiring an engineer, and we live in the age of it's good enough.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just not.
Right.
I can tell you one thing right now that made the biggest difference in my mixing that a lot of people will never know. And,
Right.
They say, why do my mixes sound different everywhere else than when they do in the studio?
Yeah.
And that secret is filtering. It's high pass filtering.
Right.
Getting rid of the subs that rob
Right.
your amp power.
Right.
Biggest secret, turned my mixing around.
Yeah.
Putting a high pass filter on my mix at 23 hertz, closing my eyes, trying it 24 hertz, 26 hertz,
Right.
seeing what worked the best.
That's crazy. Nice. And what is your primary approach or philosophy when you start mixing a track?
It really depends on the genre.
Right. Well, like for a score, for example.
Yeah, in general, building from the ground up, reducing something to its core, listening to the sections individually, like
Right.
balancing the brass, making sure that you're balanced between the trumpets, trombones, bass trombone, tuba,
Right.
chimbassos are correct. Balancing the sections and then making sure they're realistic to each other.
Right.
Now, that said, know the score that you're working on, because sometimes the realistic, the balances are not supposed to be realistic.
Right.
And how is your composer, your client, hearing it?
Yeah.
One of the guys that I work with, the joke that we had was that the further away from middle C it was, the less he wanted to hear the note. So as a consequence, his trumpets were unrealistically quiet.
Right.
Two loudest things in our orchestra, trumpets and piccolos.
Right.
His French horns were incredibly hot, which is a beautiful sound, of
Right.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Strings would never get buried by the brass. In a real orchestra in the room,
Yeah.
they do get buried by the
All
brass
the
at
time.
times.
Yeah.
So now that doesn't mean that any of that's wrong.
Right.
It's just that it's how he wanted to hear it, and you can get a beautiful sounding score that way.
Right.
So that's part of my approach, and it depends on who you're working with.
Nice. I like to wrap up each podcast with the same kind of set of questions. The first one is, who is your most influential teacher? And it can be a few, if you want.
Jerry Hay.
Yeah.
Jerry Hay.
Okay.
Not only from a musical standpoint of listening and also making sure that things are tight. I was lucky to be his engineer for a while before his son Andrew became such a wonderful engineer. But also on how to be in the studio, how to carry yourself, how to listen.
Yeah.
When Jerry his pet peeve was he'd say, go to bar 23, punch in on the and of 4.
Right.
And the engineer would say, okay, so you want me to go to bar, and he just wants you to do it.
Yeah.
He doesn't want confirmation, because he's sitting there holding his horn, and these guys are working very physical instruments. So you pay attention, you listen, you watch, you be responsive, understand the music, know how to read a chart,
Exactly.
and be fast. John Debney was fast.
Nice.
Jerry's fast, efficient. Know your acts, know your gear.
Right.
Know how you can bring your talent so that you're not in the way of progress.
Right. Nice. The next question is, what is your favorite reference track if you have to go to a new studio and kind of learn the room?
Anything I've mixed.
Yeah. It's true, honestly.
One of my favorite all times is the opening track on the Men in Black CD. It sounds so amazing. I believe that Sean Murphy mixed that.
Right.
What a brilliant engineer. And also what an inspiration, like watching him work, where he's editing the score while he's recording it. He's marking the score with takes, and then by the time you're done, it's edited pretty much.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. Last question. What would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming engineer?
Don't leave the room. The repeated line.
Yes.
You know, when I was coming up, we didn't have the internet, and I would sit in the machine room and read every manual that I could, learn the gear. Back then, Macworld and Mac User were also great reading because, but well, this is of course when computers started becoming the thing. Right. But I learned before that and learned the gear. Pay attention, like listen to your client, anticipate needs.
Yeah.
And when they ask for something, you know, do your best to understand the question and be able to help and not be in the way.
Right.
The worst thing is when you're an engineer and you have to go looking for the assistant.
Yeah.
When you're freelance, it's always the idiosyncrasies of the room, the things, you know, because a lot of rooms have many things in common.
Yeah.
It's what they don't have in common.
Exactly.
You rely on the house engineer for.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it all, you know, the success of the session comes down to the engineer.
It's a team.
Not the assistant.
You are all part of a team.
So it's,
we're there to support the artist, whether it's composer or whatever it is. You're all in a team. And the hours are long. It's a very intense. There's a lot of energy coming at you when you're the engineer, and just understand your part in it and be the right part of that team.
Right. Awesome. Nice. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
I really so glad that you asked me, and
awesome.
It's great to see you again after all these years.
Definitely. Awesome. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe for all the updates, and I'll see you next week.